love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Oh, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again.
Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. Finally got to bed this morning at 5:30 a.m. my time. We had a mammoth late evening program, the Retrospective Season 2 replay, and it was the interview I did with John Rosier, Season 2, Number 5. And it was fabulous to have John himself watch it again with me, along with Gillian Ford also watching along with me. So it was just terrific to spend time with them, and it's a really great interview if you get a chance to go back and watch. Well, it's season 13, episode 13, which is revisiting season 2, episode 5. And John Kayla is watching right now, and he says, hello, wow, been listening to the John and Gillian all day while painting. Powerful stuff. Yeah, it's a really, John Rosier knows his stuff, and wow, he really, it's hard to believe that it was 5 years ago, but the content of what he was saying was just fresh and current and as relevant today as it was 5 years ago. So, yeah, I hope you get a chance to check out this revisiting of season 2. One of the reasons I am actually uploading these to YouTube is because Facebook, come June 26, I believe, is erasing all live all the live videos from groups. I'm not sure if it's also from personal pages, but already I've lost 2. And the sad thing about that is that while, yes, we will have them on YouTube and everyone can watch them, is that a lot of the live videos, not just season 2, but all of them have really amazing comments and commentary. And I was hoping that was going to be a resource as well, not just the interview, but people could go and really enjoy the comments and what people were saying, particularly for future generations that look back. They could go, oh, this is what people were saying back in 2020 or 2025 or whatever. But sadly, Facebook are deleting all the live videos. Fortunately, I have all of them backed up on a 12 terabyte hard drive, but I think more importantly, we're finally getting them out there onto YouTube, where they will hopefully reside for many years to come and act as a powerful resource for anyone interested in information about Des Ford and Glacier View. So today's interview that we will watch together, if people in the comments could just give me a reply that it's actually working. Sometimes I mistakenly have my mute button on, so if someone watching could let me know that we are actually live and it's all happening, that would be terrific. I think we are, because I think that's John's comment from today. Yeah, so today's program is a release of season 2, episode 6, with Dr. Kenneth Samples. And Ken was Walter Martin's protege. In many ways, he took over the Walter Martin ministry after Walter Martin passed away. And I tell you what, Walter Martin played a huge role on the influence of the very direction of Seventh-day Adventism. And so if you, a lot of this material about Des Ford, Glacier View is out there. We've talked about it. I don't want to make each interview a re-explain about it. So go to Wikipedia, search Dr. Desmond Ford, Glacier View, and up will come a lot of information for you. But Walter Martin, and well, you'll hear it in the interview. I won't go over it again. Part of this journey is that we learn on the go. And Rochelle, how are you? Good to have you watching. Rochelle has asked We're live. What's the schedule for the week? So, schedule is as usual. However, we did the extra one last night because John Rosier lives in the UK, and it was the only time I could get him last night. My time about 10 p.m., 4 a.m. California time, um, midday in Europe and the UK. And so we're doing a little bit of a flip this week. We're having another two from the season 2. So that's today and this time tomorrow. And the gospel program this week still going ahead, this time on Thursday in California and lunchtime on Friday, is Tyler Morgan. He'll be sharing on our Good News Gospel Fellowship program. So hopefully that all makes sense. Andy Mac was watching last night. I need sleep, she says. Andy, I got to sleep about 5:30. Andy is in Western Australia, so I think it was 3 hours behind, something like that. Anyway, it was a lot of fun, and I highly recommend if you get a chance to watch the John Rosier interview. Season 2 was just such a powerful series. I interviewed everyone from Des Ford to George Knight, so many different people in between, and it's such a powerful series that I'm really pleased that it's finally getting out there. And I think tomorrow I'll be re-releasing the interview I did with Gordon Hammond, which is interesting. So that's going to be tomorrow at this time. So today, Ken Samples. Tomorrow, Gordon Hammond. And our Good News Fellowship the next day, Tyler Morgan. Today, we do have a sponsor. And this person wishes to remain anonymous. They know who they are, and I'm not sure if they're watching or not at the moment, but I've emailed them, and hopefully they will join soon. And yes, but I thank them very much for their support. Each one of these programs, the Series 2, I'm offering a chance for people to sponsor and put their name or a website or some kind of business that they want to promote. This particular series is definitely going out to a wide audience. So if you would like to become a sponsor of one of these programs, look at the list, go to our Facebook group. The list of the interviews of season 2 are all there. Many are going already and gone. So let me know if you'd like to sponsor one of these programs. And as I said, the person today is just wishing to remain anonymous, but I thank them very much for their support. Thank you. So let's just
Hello and welcome to
over
SDA.
to today's it's always confusing for me. Today's re-release of my interview with Kenneth Samples, Dr. Kenneth Samples, that occurred, I think, May 2020. So yeah, enjoy. Sit back, write your comments, and enjoy.
A Q&A podcast, and now we go live also in our Facebook group SDA Q&A, which your listeners are welcome to look up, and those that are here right now watching, I feel a little bit that I've got a dual personality, that I'm talking to a live audience and to the podcast listeners as well, who are just going to be hearing the audio. Today I'm joined by Dr. Ken Samples. Welcome, Dr. Ken, and I'm told I can call you Ken, so welcome, yeah. Ken. Good to have you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Peter. I have had a long interest in everything Seventh-day Adventism, and so it's a pleasure and an honor to be on your program, and so thank you for thinking about me.
Oh, I was so excited. I think Lance was the one that contacted you as well.
Yeah, right.
And,
It's he's only 21, and he's just so
Wow.
on fire to present all sides of this story,
Yeah.
and I think he's managed to possibly talk Dr. George Knight into doing an interview as well.
Very good. Yeah. Good.
So I appreciate his efforts there. And when he said you were going to be chatting, I was just thrilled because I think it's important to have people who aren't Adventists but have a love of the gospel to come on the program and share their perspectives. It gives another whole unique perspective. And one of the really interesting things about your connection with this topic is that you were kind of mentored in many ways, or a protege of Dr. Walter Martin. And
Yes. Very, very much so. My apologetics career really began with Walter Martin, and in fact, he was probably the first serious Bible teacher that I had as I was, a college student, and his imprimatur, so to speak, has cast a big shadow on my life. And because he was interested in Adventism, I became interested in Adventism, and I miss Walter a lot. He was a very significant person in my life, and I'm glad that people are talking about these issues, because I think it shows, in some measure, the importance of his work as well.
oh yes, totally. I think the influence he and Barnhouse to some degree, because
Yeah,
Barnhouse was kind of the publisher,
right.
the influence they had on talking to the church leaders in the late 50s and releasing questions on doctrine is a pivotal
Yeah.
turning point, I believe, in Adventist history. And so he certainly has had an incredible influence. Um, I'm I'm keen. Like, you met him and started kind of working with him in the late 80s.
Yeah.
I've watched the John Ankerberg shows, which were, I think, 82 or something, and
Yeah.
84 with, there's one with Walter Ray and Des Ford, and one with Walter Martin and Dr. Johnson.
Right.
And they were just mind-blowing to me. I only really started getting to see them when YouTube was kind of invented, whenever that
Yeah.
was.
Right.
And I've watched them many, many times. I watched them both again in the last 24 hours. And every time I watch, there's some sort of wisdom that comes out.
Mm.
And Walter Martin's got a very honest, upfront, almost provocative. I mean that in a good way. What you see is what you get.
Yeah.
Were you, even though you kind of met him in the late 80s, were you aware of him before that? And were you aware of these shows on Ankerberg?
Yes, I grew up kind of in a nominal Catholic family, and right at I began college, I read C.S. Lewis. I bumped into Walter Martin, and I moved toward an evangelical Protestant view. I attended Walter's Bible class. He had a long-standing class that he taught in Southern California. I attended that class for a number of years before I went to work for Walter. In fact, the first time I met Des Ford, Des was filling in for Walter Martin and preaching on justification by faith. And I thought, who is this Martin Luther I'm listening to here?
Oh,
So I knew of some of the backdrop. I'd seen some of the programs. In fact, I'd even written a term paper on Adventism when I was in college, kind of looking at these issues. So when I came to work for Walter in early 1987, I was kind of designated as the specialist on Seventh-day Adventism.
interesting.
Yeah.
I'm very keen to get your opinions of these later years with Walter and his reflections on Adventism. But
Right.
first, let's go right back and look at questions on doctrine and the Barnhouse Martin duo, and
Right.
their work with cults. And my understanding is they were about to release a book that included Adventists and Adventism as a cult. Can you now kind of unpack a bit of that big story to give us some background to that from the Walter Martin perspective, and what then occurred leading up to the release of Questions on Doctrine?
Yeah, happy to do so. So in the late 1950s, what I would call kind of counter-cult apologetics was just at the beginning. There were few evangelicals writing in the field. Anthony Hoekema was more reformed in orientation. John Gerstner was a Calvinist theologian who wrote in the field. And Walter was quite a young man. He had been mentored by Donald Gray Barnhouse. In fact, Walter was about the age in the late 50s that I was when I began working with Walter. And there was planned to have a book that would cover Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Christian Science, and Seventh-day Adventism. And one of the Adventist administrators had contacted Donald Gray Barnhouse and actually complimented some of the preaching that Barnhouse had done on salvation by grace through faith in Christ. And Barnhouse was kind of taken aback. Why would you be impressed with justification by faith? You're an Adventist, and don't Adventists believe in kind of works righteousness? Well, Barnhouse kind of said to his young protege, Walter Martin, I think you need to look into this. So Walter began an extensive evaluation of Adventism. And I think it was Unruh who said, yeah, let's cooperate with Barnhouse and Martin. So Walter met with three individuals. We call them Frieda, Froom, Reed, and Anderson. And I have to say, Peter, that Walter was a no-nonsense kind of guy. He was a straight shooter. And I think he went into this thinking Adventism was sub-Christian, that it was not consistent with historic Christianity, that maybe it had an Arian view of Christ. Its view of salvation seemed rather legalistic. There was concern about Ellen White as a living prophet. But Walter was very impressed with Froom, Reed, and Anderson. I think especially Anderson. He thought he saw something in these men and in what they believed that was fundamentally different than what he had encountered in the Watchtower and in the Latter-day Saints. And when he brought that back to Barnhouse, of course, it was kind of controversial, but Barnhouse knew Walter was a good researcher. He was forthright. He was careful. And of course, when they came out with their findings that Adventism was a Christian denomination, it was heterodox rather than heretical. 25% of the subscribers to Eternity magazine, edited by Donald Gray Barnhouse, they withdrew their subscription. I mean, I can't imagine an evangelical magazine today taking a risk like that.
No, that was very brave.
I think that Barnhouse and Martin were courageous. They had a lot of confidence in the Adventist people that they knew. I would say, looking back, I'm not sure Walter and Barnhouse knew that there was an undercurrent of disagreement in Adventism at that time. I don't think Walter knew that there was a traditionalist as well as an evangelical branch. And I think some of that tension came out later, but Walter always spoke very respectfully about the Adventists that he encountered. And quite frankly, I think he thought that was one of the accomplishments in his ministry that he was most proud of. And I'll tell you why, because people like he and I who deal with doctrine and deal with heresy, and when we think, wow, this is actually a Christian group, it is, I think he saw it as something that was very significant. And I think it even led later to feeling rather disappointed that it had
Mm.
not worked out quite the way he thought it or had hoped it would.
He even later, I think, maybe felt that he was hoodwinked a little bit, even though I'm not suggesting that. My belief is that they were very genuine in wanting to present
Yeah,
a progression with Adventism. It's
yeah,
interesting. You're mentioning Anderson there. His brother lived in Kurrambong here, where I live. His name was O.K. Anderson, and
yeah.
he was very opposed to his brother being on that
Oh, wow.
committee. Yeah, just as
You
an
know,
interesting
I'll tell
aside.
you a brief story. When this is probably 1988, Walter and I went to Loma Linda University and gave a talk. And after the meeting, Walter and I met with Anderson's wife. Anderson had passed away at that point. And boy, Walter and Mrs. Anderson, I could tell there was such a real connection
Mm,
there. I was just really impressed by the graciousness and the respect that he had. So he saw something that he respected, and he saw something that he thought was not cultic, it was Christian.
yeah, and I think he accurately assessed that too. I think there's really within Adventism almost two constantly opposing. It's not left and right as far as traditional conservative liberal in that,
Yeah,
in my opinion. It's more a deep seated, this is our understanding of Adventism. No, this is our understanding of Adventism. And the two you can't put in a box, but the two, generally speaking, have run into conflict with each other at several key points in Adventist history.
yeah.
The actual book, Questions on Doctrine, was that, I know it was sanctioned by the General Conference of Adventists at the time. Did they release it, or was it a Barnhouse release? Or was it a co-release?
Um, I think it was published by the Seventh Day Adventists. I think, however, Eternity Magazine promoted it. You know, made it clear that uh, this was the document that had come out of these types of dialogues. And you know, Walter was very much affirming of that book. Later on, um, when the book went out of print, Walter was disappointed by
Yeah,
that and
yeah,
wondered why that book had not remained.
yeah.
But at the time, no, I believe it was indeed published by the Adventists, but Barnhouse and Martin made evangelicals aware of it.
What's incredible to note, that not only did he influence kind of a turning point in Adventism there, but that book, and because it was sanctioned by the GC and a more progressive leadership from top to bottom, well, as in the GC level, um, the membership rose within Adventism, so that by the time, so there was about 1 million members around then, but by the time we come to the Ankerberg show with Martin and Johnson, there's 4 million Adventists,
Wow,
and that is largely because of that book, because
wow,
people saw this as, oh, okay, so they're not a cult and it's an evangelical church, and they joined, and that created a garden for people like Des Ford, again, my opinion,
yeah, yeah,
to flourish and to grow. And so a lot of people that became Adventists under that kind of that new paradigm fell in love with the church and see as much ownership with the church as the people who want to go back to a more historicist kind of view. So it's an incredibly influential book, but I think in many ways not talked about so much because it was taken off the shelves by the time the
yeah,
more conservative leadership had taken on the steering of the Adventist ship. And so it was removed. So I understand why Walter would have been concerned and
yeah,
upset. And then as he would have been observing through the 70s, the rise of Des Ford and the
right,
often called New Theology, he probably would have felt comfortable and, oh, that's a good sign. But by the time we had Glacier View and the defrocking of Des, he must have started being very concerned. Can you tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
that observation?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Walter developed a very strong friendship with Desmond Ford, and he was perplexed by Des being sacked. I have to tell you, when I first heard Des preach, I thought, my goodness, I'm not sure I've ever heard another Protestant present justification with such clarity and with such passion. And Walter and I both viewed Des as kind of, one of the fathers of the evangelical Adventist movement, and to have such an articulate voice, such a passionate voice, publicly dismissed. That was the beginning of Walter wondering what's going on in Seventh-day Adventism, and did I get the straight scoop? If so, why is this happening? And Des and Walter continued a friendship long after that. I know a couple different times Des came and spoke at Walter's Bible class, and we did events together. That was Walter, Des, and I. So yeah, there was a growing concern, and in many ways, both Walter and I went to Des and asked, Des, tell us what's happening here. What, from your vantage point, what's going on here? Is there a change, or was there division right from the beginning? How strong is the traditionalist perspective? How significant is the evangelical side? So, Des was a part in kind of helping us to understand what was happening during these events. And it's hard not to, to be perfectly candid, Des was always very encouraging to me, and I was just very impressed with his scholarship. He was a tough guy, but he was also a gentleman. And Walter and I were very strong friends with Des, his wife, and supported his ministry.
Is there, it's really good to hear that perspective, actually, the respect that he garnered from outside of the Adventist Church. We often just hear the controversy, and it's very, and a lot of people respected him within the Adventist Church, but we often forget that he was well respected in the broader evangelical community as well. So it's very good to hear that.
And, Peter, I might add, too, that Des never stopped being an Adventist, in a sense. I mean, I've had many hours with him going back and forth on issues like the Sabbath, talking about conditional immortality, annihilationism. I mean, as sharp as the differences were in him being dismissed at Glacier View, we still had differences, as Christian to Christian, looking at some of these distinctive features of Seventh-day Adventism.
Yes. Yeah, that often confused me, actually, that there was still a deep Adventist kind of thread running through his post-leaving or being defrocked. And that would have definitely led to some interesting discussions.
Yeah.
Did you happen to record any of those discussions?
I wish I would have. I know there are some. I don't know if you're aware of some of the last recordings of Walter, Des, and myself. This would have been very close to Walter's death, around June of 1989. Some of those are still available, and I'll see if I can get you in touch with some of that material.
That would be great, because the great thing about social media and what we're doing here with the live feed is that people are commenting, and we can add material as a link below to this to relate to this conversation. I've just got a mental blank about, did Ankerberg do an interview with Walter Martin and Des, or was it only Walter Ray and Des?
Well, Walter appeared on the Ankerberg program about Adventism a couple different times. I think he did one with Ray, but he also did one with Johnson, which was quite controversial, kind of confrontational, if you will. Ankerberg, by the way, was initially kind of on the side that Adventism was a cult, and maybe Walter had made a mistake. I think through it all, Ankerberg came to have greater respect for Walter's position. But yeah, those tapes were those recordings, I think, had a lot of importance, and again, it extended the idea that Walter was trying to figure out what has happened in Adventism from the late 50s now into the early 80s and to the late 80s. And he was trying to track what happened to questions on doctrine. Are there now two distinct branches in Seventh-day Adventism? And of course, the flop about Ford remained quite controversial.
So after that period then, did he do much writing about these doubts and thoughts that he had, or were they more just accruing a bunch of information and chatting to you about it and others? Did he start putting pen to paper with a lot of this?
Well, when I started working with Walter, I was employed in January of 1987, and very soon after I began working with him, I was asked to write kind of a reappraisal of Seventh-day Adventism. I think we called it an update on Seventh-day Adventism.
Oh, interesting.
And that article is still available on the web.
Wow.
It's entitled From Controversy to Crisis, an updated assessment of Seventh-day Adventism. In that article, I kind of track what was happening in the 50s, then bringing in questions on doctrine, Glacier view, and kind of I then began talking more about a traditional view of Adventism and an evangelical view of Adventism. That article then led an invitation to Walter and myself to come to Loma Linda, the seminary there in California. And that was a presentation, and I think tapes are available from that as well.
Boy, that would be a valuable document to contribute to the series.
But by the way, do you know Pastor Larry Christoffel? Does that name ring a bell?
Not to me, but I'm sure there's many listeners that would know that.
He would be a person who would have access to a lot of these tapes. And in fact, Pastor Christoffel, an Adventist that was a pastor for a long time in Loma Linda, he and I interviewed dozens and dozens of Adventist pastors about where they stood. You really should get Larry on the program. He could give you a lot of good documentation, and he would be a very important, I think, voice to consider.
I'm just wondering if someone that's watching, if they could just make a little note in the comments. What was the name again?
Larry Christoffel. He is a pastor still in Southern California, but I don't think he's any longer in Loma Linda.
Did he and yourself and Walter interview Adventist ministers that were disgruntled, or just a general? You just had general interviews across the board?
Well, we came up with a survey. I think this was actually after Walter had passed away, about 1990. Christoffel and myself came up with a survey asking questions about how do you understand the investigative judgment? How do you understand the role of Ellen G. White? What is your view of justification by faith? And we interviewed pastors and theologians that were more traditional, some more evangelical, and I might add, some in the Loma Linda area had gone to more liberal schools like Claremont, and they held more higher critical views of the Bible. They held more of a theologically liberal perspective. This, by the way, then later led to a conference, I think about 2007, where I was invited to the seminary, and there was a conference about questions on doctrine.
Wow.
Must have been maybe like a 30-year. And I wrote a paper for that, which is available on the web as well.
Oh boy, I would love links to these. We'll have to add you to the group if you're okay with
Yeah.
that. And
I'll send you some of these links.
yeah,
Yeah, happy
I
to.
would love that. So it does sound like, because what I think happened, I know as a young boy, I was too young to really know what was going on during the 80s. Even though I should have known better, I would have been in my 20s by then. But the church was quite good at kind of suppressing a lot of this kind of information. We just didn't really hear about it, and it wasn't until the 90s that I started discovering a lot of this stuff. I think I mentioned off air the 1919 conference minutes that had gone missing and become available in the 70s. I remember reading those, reading about 1888, reading a lot of Des Ford, reading Bob Brinsmead's book. I think it was, is it 1844 Revisited? I think it's called.
And then later, The Shaking of Adventism. Yeah.
Shaking of Adventism. Lowell Tarling has written some amazing books as well. I think The Edges of Adventism. I read Walter Ray's White Lie book, and I just kind of had this all of a sudden in the 90s, just this barrage of incredible, of revelations, I guess. But a lot of Adventists, there was some pockets of liberal Adventism that you could kind of live within those waters and not really be scathed too much by the more critical elements. However, it's sad in a way to think that maybe Walter Martin was right. Not saying that Adventism is a cult, but these more historicist views on righteousness by faith and how to get into heaven and this kind of thing are starting to bear out in current events, with the division coming up with the compliance document that now is, I don't know if you'd call it in policy, but it's definitely able to be enacted on. 6 unions have been warned. Do you know much about these current events within Adventism that Walter Martin would be even more upset with? Because you chatted with him, with you, Des, and Walter only just a few years ago. So did the current events come up in those topics, or in your discussions, or was it just more reflective?
No, I think both. There certainly. I spent a lot of time talking with Walter Martin about the early meetings, and then the interactions on Ankerberg, and then later Walter and I meeting with the entire theological faculty at Loma Linda University. There were these issues that were coming up, and so I think there was a growing sense. And here is my take. I think that Froom, Reed, and Anderson wanted to put the best face on Adventism possible, and I understand that. I'm not sure that Walter understood that there were some very strong currents in different directions at that early point, and I think that led to Walter maybe thinking, "Hey, wait a second, have I not been given the straight scoop, or where did all of this tension come from?" I think in my own assessment, I mean, in the article I wrote in 1988, an updated assessment of Seventh-day Adventism, I compared what I called evangelical Adventism with traditional Adventism. I alluded to kind of a liberal element. Later, I wrote an article in Christianity Today in the 1990s where I talked about 4 varieties of Adventism: evangelical, traditional, liberal, and more cultural Adventists. And so, talking with Des Ford and talking with some people, and by the way, I should also mention this. There are some people in the countercult community. Now, this is a particular type of apologetics, the defense of the faith. This deals with the orthodoxy or less than orthodoxy of religious groups. There are people that I know that were working in the field when I was, who wonder if Adventism has not taken the wrong step, and maybe Walter and Ken Samples were duped by this. Um, I don't know that they have made the kind of investment necessary to be able to draw those conclusions, but I should tell you there are some people who've left Adventism, have felt that they were to some degree deceived. And so there are people in the countercult community that are wondering about Seventh-day Adventism and are wondering about this reevaluation that went on with Barnhouse, Walter, and then later with myself.
Yeah, that's interesting, and there is grounds for concern. Did Walter have an opportunity to almost have another kind of a go at interviewing leaders, or did they kind of not accept? Did he try and get some interviews with some of the leaders through the 80s and 90s, 2000?
Yeah, we, one of the last conversations I had with Walter, 2 weeks before Walter passed away, he died in June of 1989, 2 weeks before his death, Walter Martin Desford and I were in Riverside, California, not far from Loma Linda, giving various talks on Adventism. And Walter and I at the time were kind of planning out a book that would reevaluate Adventism. And Walter definitely wanted to have more interviews. My impression was that a lot of the administrators did not want to talk to Walter Martin. And he didn't feel like he didn't feel like they were as accessible in the late 80s as they had been in the 50s.
Yes, I think that's a fair assessment. In fact, I credit William Johnson as being quite courageous for doing that interview.
Yeah.
Adventists aren't that good or aren't as experienced in talking with the secular world or the larger evangelical Christian world. There's a little bit of caution and a little bit of naivety there, but I really think he was very courageous to do that. But
Yeah.
I think it was possibly the last time an Adventist leader was put into the spotlight and asked difficult questions publicly. I can't think of any time since 1984 in that interview. And I would have I reckon that Walter possibly tried to talk to some of these guys. Are you aware of that?
Well, I do know that from 88 to 89, we were in contact with some of the faculty members on the theological staff of Loma Linda University and other places, and there was some discussion of trying to get administrators involved in the dialogue. Later, when we did our survey, this is with the pastor that I mentioned, we wanted to have more Adventist leadership to respond to some of this, but most of the interviews we did were theological faculty, and then I would say I think it's the Southeastern Conference here in Loma Linda, Riverside area, I'll bet we interviewed more than 100 pastors, theologians, church workers. And my recollection was that if the data is to be believed, and of course I tried to give it the benefit of the doubt, I thought that an evangelical side was probably in the ascendancy there, although there were some very strong traditional views expressed as well.
Yeah, so you felt there was kind of a positive rise and move upward and forward. And I think a lot of Adventists felt that. I know as a young Adventist we were told, hang in there, it's getting better, things are changing. because there was a massive, I'm talking about the positive effect of questions on doctrine. There was a massive backlash to it as well.
Yeah,
Massive,
yeah,
like a movement called the Concerned Brethren grew out of their distaste for that book. And
yeah.
in many ways, that movement has influenced every conservative movement. The Standish Brothers were
Sure.
most very powerful in
Yeah,
presenting their opposition to Des Ford and the New Theology and questions on doctrine. And their influence can be traced, I believe, through to all the current independent ministries, the fundamental ministries within Adventism, and even to leadership at high levels. So that had a profound effect on Adventism. And so growing up, we would be constantly, if you're a bit more liberal, you'd be constantly having conflicting tension and arguments with the more conservative element. But we were told that things were changing, things are getting better, and right up through to Jan Paulsen becoming president, there was hope that the progressives would at least be able to, or the leaders would at least create an environment where both sides could coexist, learn to agree to disagree. But after he left, and I think Ted Wilson came on straight after him, really that ascension of progress and optimism started to wane. And then when they had the last GC where there was the no vote on women's ordination, when they then brought in the compliance document, and then in the recent autumn council, I think September last year, where 6 unions were warned and told that sanctions would be forthcoming, I think we can assess now that this ascension is now declining. I'm surprised that a lot of liberal Adventists are still very hopeful. There's an inbuilt positivity and optimism, I think, that a lot of Adventists have. And maybe that's why. But I fear that if things continue the way they are, it would appear that Walter Martin would truly have been right to have his concerns, and I wish that he had been able to maybe explore some of that more publicly as well. That might have been able to help. Yeah, and
I have a question. I have been told, and I wonder what your perspective is on this, that the largest body of Adventist people are outside the United States. I have also been told that outside of America, the traditional wing of the church is strongest.
yes.
Would you agree with that?
Yes, I mean, a lot of these votes of the no vote, the compliance document, the autumn council, they're still not 80-20 to conservative. There's still a bit of a closer kind of race, but yes, the general trend is that the conservative elements are more represented outside of America, and are gaining power and influence politically, and and again, I have to really highlight, these are just my opinions as an observer, someone that's been quite a keen observer over the years, and I never would criticise my Adventist brothers and sisters in the sense of their character and personalities. I was chatting to a businessman recently in town. He's just near where I live, and he's not an Adventist. I don't think he's a Christian even. But he said, "I've never met an Adventist I didn't like," and that's true. So these aren't issues that I'm trying to drag down Adventism or to raise up to drag down Adventism, but they're issues that I think are affecting people adversely, and I think something needs to happen or come to a head to, as I said earlier, there's this tension since Walter Martin was interviewing Frieda, and it's ongoing to this day. And I just feel like there needs to be some kind of conversation about it to bring it out more. And you just alluded to the conversation you had with Walter before he died. That there's been rumours going around that he was going to release a book saying that he, had changed his mind and Adventism was now heading towards being more of a cult. And you're saying that he was going to release a book, but do you think he was going to say that in his book?
Well, he never communicated to me that he would move in the direction of reversing himself. But I think there was, he had talked to me about the two of us collaborating on a book, and that would be to kind of tell the story, but it would also then raise all of these provocative questions to the new generation of Adventist leaders. And we would, raise Glacier View. We would raise a variety of issues. So I think it was a book that, I never got the impression that Walter was going to reverse his view, but he had a lot of questions, and he wanted to press for answers because, again, he took Barnhouse and Martin took a lot of heat for that decision.
Yes. He had skin in the game.
They were putting their reputations on the line, and again, I have met so many Adventists. I know lots of Seventh-day Adventists, and I have to say the vast majority have been people of goodwill. Most of them, of course, that I know are more of the evangelical variety, but there's a lot of positive things in Adventism, and I think Walter saw that, but he had some questions, and it would have been interesting to have a whole new generation of administrators and theologians to revisit those kinds of questions. And I think that's the kind of book we hoped might be something we could put together.
It's interesting that you're kind of alluding to the fact that he was almost frustrated that he wasn't really getting the answers. And in the '84 interview on the Ankerberg show, he's frustrated that he's not getting the answers. The Adventist leadership seems very good at just being able to kind of make you see a little bit of something, and then hang on, no, and to be pinned down. There's a couple.
Well, they are politicians after all, and that's yeah. Well, it was interesting, I think, getting to know both Walter and Des. Neither one of them were politicians. They had deep convictions. They stood up for their convictions. And I would still say that, Des still defended, he had a very high view of Ellen White, even after the plagiarism, even after a lot of the controversy. And of course, I think probably I talked with him just, I bet about a year before he passed away. And we were on a program talking about, of all things, David Koresh and the Branch Davidians. It was the 25th anniversary. And we were dialoguing, and I could still tell that Des was still an Adventist in many ways.
Yeah. Someone, I'm just looking over here. I've managed to set up a monitor now so I can kind of see people's comments, but I'm also aware that I'm getting older and need some different kind of glasses. Occasionally I peer over, and I'm going to be interviewing on Monday Pastor Lloyd Grolleman, because I'm trying to get people that are centre, left and right, and sure. He's probably more supportive of Des, the outcome of Glacier View than you or I may be. And he's just said something that I just want to raise and get your thoughts on, if that's okay.
Sure.
He says, I think you guys on this thread need to accept that there was a vote. You may not like the result. He says, I don't, but you might... Sorry, I just need to hold it a bit closer. But you might want to recognise that in Australia and the Western world, women are employed in ministry on exactly the same basis as their male counterparts. There's nothing I can't do in ministry that the female pastor next door to me can't do. We get the same wage, the same titles, do the same jobs. It's all exactly the same. We can and should continue to advance change. And I think it's great that he's wanting to advance change, and I'm looking forward to chatting with him. But the first sentence, I think you guys need to accept that there was a vote. One of the interesting things, and what made me think of it, was you're saying that Des respected Ellen White. In the early, I might be wrong, late 1800s, early 1900s, she helped set up the unions within Adventism. So they've got the world divisions, the unions, and then the conferences, and then the local churches. Yeah. And the unions were set up to kind of oversee subtle subcultural differences within their region. And I think that's a brilliant idea. I can see why Des respected lots of her thoughts and ideas and stuff. And so my answer to Lloyd would be, yes, it was taken to a vote, but that was a global vote. What we were hoping was that the unions would retain the right to decide for their area whether women could be ordained or not, depending on the subcultural conditions of their region. So what concerns me is Ellen White spoke strongly about this kingship kind of thing. She did not like the idea of the General Conference, the president, having this kind of global authority. And I'm just interested in your thoughts on that. Would you agree that it's like some people say, well, if you go to church, you've got to have your rules and abide by them. But I thought it was a good way of setting up the unions was a good way of keeping things a little bit more open around the world, depending on, as I said, the regions. In your experience with general evangelical body, is there a sense that people make up their own mind in certain areas? Are you opposed to kind of a centralized global kingship kind of rule over Christianity? Just what are your thoughts on that bunch of stuff I just said?
Yeah, let me start with a bit of a comment about Ellen White. My understanding is that her husband, James White, held kind of an Arian Christology. So Arianism, of course, would be the idea that Jesus isn't fully divine. The Father created the Son. So it is a denial of the full deity of Christ and a denial of the Trinity. What some Adventist theologians have told me is that Ellen White had some kind of a Methodist connection, and that Ellen White played a role in the Adventist church moving away from Arianism toward Trinitarianism.
Yes.
I would say that I think Ellen White had some good theological instincts. Now, the idea of a living prophet, the idea of an inspired writer, and the plagiarisms and things like that trouble me. But when I think about the history of Adventism, I wonder where the Adventist church would have been early on had she not moved the church, if in fact that's the case, that she moved it in the Trinitarian direction. Your broader question, of course, evangelicals have quite a controversy when it comes to the ordination of women.
They're divided as well.
Yeah, complementarianism versus egalitarianism. And then I would even add that the questions of the questions of difference here. I mean, evangelicals have some very strong differing ideas, but there is this very common, I think, evangelical consensus. And one of the things that interests me about Seventh-day Adventism, I think creeds have played a very significant role in the history of Christianity in terms of kind of laying the groundwork for a basic orthodoxy. And what I find interesting in Adventism is it's rather non-creedal, but there is this stage where it could have gone one way or another. I mean, Jehovah's Witnesses, of course, have remained with an Arian Christology. They're Unitarian. I would say the Mormons have a tritheism, three individual gods. Somewhere along the line, I think that the Adventists made the right move. And I'm speaking, of course, because I agree with Christian orthodoxy and against those kinds of views. But could I say, Peter, I think the evangelical church today, and that word is harder and harder to define, I think we have some of the same problems that Adventists have. I mean, I think I think there's a very liberal, and I don't mean that politically, I mean it theologically. There's more of an evangelical liberal bent. There's more the Reformation Protestant bent. And then there are many evangelicals that I think are quite cultural. So we also have problems, and they are to some degree similar to the Adventist challenges. Lest I appear like I'm coming along and saying we've solved all these issues and we're critiquing your church.
No, you're not at all. And I only kind of raised those kind of observations because Adventists often don't really know a lot about what the evangelical movement is up to, thinking about.
Yeah.
And I respect what Pastor Lloyd was saying there, where continue to move forward in advance with the idea and hope that things change for the good. Where he and I may disagree is that I'm suggesting that there is a demonstrable evidence to suggest that the trajectory is going the other way. And that's why people are very more frustrated now than I think they have ever been.
Okay.
And I think my prediction is Ted Wilson will get in again at the next GC this year. And 90% of people disagree with me. But I did predict the no vote, and I did predict the compliance document would be passed, and I did predict warnings and sanctions would come, and they all have. So maybe this prediction will come true. But what I'm saying is that if that does happen, I'm very interested to see the reaction from my Adventist brothers and sisters, if they will be as positive in that climate post 2020. Do you have thoughts and understandings of the compliance document and the ramifications upon Adventism at all? Do you know much about that?
I can't say I know a lot about it. Could you kind of summarize it for me?
There's 5 or 6, and look, I'm not a real expert on it at all, but there's 5 or 6 areas that they desire Adventist workers and leaders to comply to, or they will be warned, sanctioned, reprimanded, sanctioned, and I guess eventually asked to leave. And one of them is that they must agree that women's ordination should not happen. There's some quite strong views on contemporary music. There's some strong views on the 6 to 10,000 year Earth. The strong statements that must be complied to, and against gay marriage and that whole kind of sphere of its topic. And so what's worrying people is that, well, who gets to decide what future things may be added to this? What about people that want to act on their conscience in the area that they live and say, well, we feel that women can be ordained? And fine, if you're in a different country where it's not ready or you're not wanting it to happen. So the ramifications of this being passed, which it has been passed, and if you were interested in learning a bit more about it, the Autumn Council, if you YouTubed Autumn Council 7-Day Adventism Tuesday night meeting or Tuesday afternoon meeting, there's a moment there where Jan Paulson gets up to the mic and they're giving people opportunity to comment on the warnings that are about to be given. There were to be 4 warnings and 2 reprimands to unions around the world. And he gets up and pleads that the council please, take these warnings off the table, please. He was almost in tears. And Ted Wilson, after he's finished, wraps him up and says, well, it's been voted through. We're now just acting on whether it's going to be a warning or a reprimand, and
Wow.
over to Mike 5. And I just, that moment saddened me more than anything
Yeah.
that I watched that day. This leader that had risen to be the president of the Adventist Church had a heart for unity with diversity, to be kind of shut down. So I think it's a really important document to understand. And a lot of people say, oh, it won't affect grassroots. But just imagine a union leader is told he must comply. It goes against his conscience, but he forces downwards to his conference levels that you must comply. They force down to their pastors, you must comply. That goes to the grassroots. It's something if you're interested in, I think I'd be very interested in people that are smarter than me to look at these things and give commentary on them.
Yeah.
And maybe down the track we can have another chat about that, because I'd love your opinion on it.
I wanted to tell you what I think it's an interesting story. For the last 23 years, I've worked at another apologetic organization called Reasons to Believe. One of our distinctive areas is, of course, the issue of science and faith, the issue of creation, which Adventists are very interested in. Of course, our point of view is an old earth creationist view. A number of years ago, I did an interview with Ron Numbers, who
health prophetess.
Yes, Ron Numbers had written a lot about the so-called clash between Christianity and science, and Numbers had argued that actually that was an overstatement, that Christianity and science had much more of a respectful relationship. But I then said to Dr. Numbers, I said, I'm an old Seventh-day Adventist researcher.
Wow.
And of course, he and I began talking, and Numbers, of course, had involvement in the initial investigation into the plagiarisms of Ellen White. And he not only left Adventism, but became a skeptic. It was kind of interesting. He was kind of reluctant to go back and talk about his Adventist roots, but I said, Ron, I remember your name in the Adventist context, but that's kind of a young earth, old earth issue that it popped out of. And I might say that there are some people who would associate the belief in a young earth, 6 to 10,000 year old, which is a very controversial thing in evangelicalism as well.
Yeah.
But many people have tied it to that young earth creationism has deep Seventh-day Adventist roots.
Interesting. Well, two things, if I can comment on that. The book that Numbers wrote, The Health Prophetess, was the first book that started to open my mind to things.
Wow.
I had to stop reading it. I'd read a couple of chapters and I had to leave it. It took me about 4 years to read because I just felt it was shaking my faith in Adventism.
Yeah.
So I encourage people to find that book. It's a very fascinating, well-documented and written book. And I personally don't mind if people believe that the Earth's 6,000 years or, billions of years, or the universe is 13, 14 billion years. I don't mind what people choose to believe. What I don't like is that a document can be written that you must comply and believe this or you're going to lose your job.
Indeed.
Or be warned.
Yeah.
That's what worries me.
Yeah.
I would love to see an Adventist church and a bigger evangelical church body be very accepting of people having divergent views. But I think we're allowed to ask questions, and the truth should withstand scrutiny. And I just can't help asking questions.
Hey, that's the way I'm wired, and the truth can stand up.
Yeah.
And yeah, I will look into some of these things you've mentioned.
Yeah, I'd love your
I'll
thoughts
see if
on
I
that.
can find out more information.
I
Yeah.
really would love your thoughts on that, and I'd love people to comment below as well. Um, do you think, would you be interested in writing a Questions on Doctrine revisited book, and see if you could talk some of the high-level leaders to to have a chat with you? I'd be interested.
Well, I have had a long-standing relationship with a number of Adventist theologians and some administrators, and I'm still interested. I don't know if I can commit myself to a book, but I remain interested. I remain interested in what's happening, and to some extent, Peter, because Walter was a very important person to me, and I think what he was involved with Adventism in the 50s, I later became involved in the 80s and 90s. So part of this is important to us because of the work that we did.
Exactly,
And
you're carrying the torch.
yeah, you know, I I believe in what I like to call it the golden rule of apologetics. And what that simply means is you attempt to treat other people's beliefs the way you want yours treated. It doesn't mean you accept everything people believe, but
Yeah.
it means that you try to be fair-minded. It means you give the benefit of the doubt. It means that you're respectful. And I think that Walter and I have always tried to do that. We tried to approach Adventism in a fair-minded way. And I think it's very critical. And what that means is some of the points you've been making are very relevant. You have to ask the difficult questions.
Mm.
Christians should be critical thinkers. Christians should care about the truth. And I think Christian leaders need to be different than your average political leaders. I think they need to have courage. They need to have candor. And of course, all of us are aspiring by grace to live that kind of life. I don't always live up to the golden rule of apologetics, but it is very important that I strive toward it. And I think Walter demonstrated that in the 50s, that he met this group that maybe he was tempted to write off as a cult. But he said, wait a second, it seems more complicated. There's something happening here.
Yeah.
And I wanna look into it. And I have to say, I still admire my old teacher Walter for wanting to invest in a group that he thought was genuinely Christian.
Yes, and I think a large number of people value that and value the way he approached it as well. I'll just quickly read a little bit that Lloyd wrote back.
Sure.
To what I said there. This is a good church with generally good people. Our leadership is also generally full of men and women who want the best for our church. We are miles ahead of other movements where women can't even get a look in, other denominations, and that's true. And what I'm saying is I'm not saying that Adventists aren't good and Adventist leaders aren't good. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there is an obvious tension and conflict within the Adventist Church, and like Walter Martin and yourself, is you're intrigued as to why there is, and we're just asking questions in the hope that restoration, reflection, rejuvenation, healing can take place.
Right.
Can you just, because I know that you've probably got a little bit of a time frame, but and I could chat to you for hours. Can you give us a little bit of your thoughts on Glacier View? How much did you know about the politics of it? Did you think Des was just kind of, well, he presented his views. The views were shown to be quite different to distinctive Adventist views, and therefore they asked him to leave? Or do you think there was a bit of manoeuvring going on that he was kind of thrown under the bus a little bit? And were you kind of aware of this at the time?
Yeah. Well, I guess it would be correct to say kind of viewed Des in rather heroic terms. I thought he was a very courageous individual. I thought he put a lot on the line. Now, part of that too is he and I agreed on a lot of these issues, and I wanted to encourage and promote evangelical Adventism. I thought that was the most healthy form of Adventist thought. There have been people who have come to me, independent of my discussions with Des, and have said that Des was not very workable, not very practical, that they probably could have come to a meaningful working through where Des could have remained an Adventist, but Des was a bull in a china shop. I know Des. Des was very strong, and that was one of the things I most admired about him. I have to say that, you know, when I looked into the issue, it did seem that there were people that went into Glacier View with a theological agenda already in mind. And so I've heard a couple different sides. I have heard that Des wouldn't cooperate, that he probably could have negotiated a more meaningful, and it could have remained on the faculty. On the other hand, I've also heard that there were people who were looking for the opportunity to, you know, to try to eliminate that very strong evangelical voice that he had. I will frankly admit I love Des Ford. Let me say again, I have a lot of friends and colleagues who I think are some of the most articulate presenters of a Protestant evangelical perspective. When it came to justification by faith, I'm not sure I've ever heard anybody, including Martin, who was any more articulate than Des Ford when it came to salvation by grace, through faith, not by works, in Christ. I remember the first time I heard him preach, I thought, this must be what Luther sounded like. So I have a real affection to Des, and I saw him as a heroic figure. But I also know that, you know, our churches do have political issues and issues to sort out. I just frankly think the Adventists lost such a credible voice. And again, I mean, Des was always trying to push back with me and Walter about the Sabbath, he was always debating us about these other issues.
Yeah.
And so I think the Adventists lost a lot when they lost Des Ford.
Yeah. Yeah. And I quite like that he didn't compromise. I mean, when they had the Glacier View, they had this consensus document. He said, "Okay, well, look, yeah, I can live with that. I can work within that," and that didn't get him kicked out. So Neil Wilson came up with convincing some academics to write the 10-point statement or document, which was harder for him to agree with because they kind of dug a bit deeper into the distinctive differences between Des' views and the church's. I think the 27 fundamentals, the Dallas document, all these documents, and he just couldn't go against that. I think some people said, "Well, look, just compromise, things will change, go slow."
Right.
And I'm the person that kind of, you know, has did that all my life. Yeah, it'll change, go slow, don't worry. But you've got this one life to live and contribute. And I really respect that he said, no, I'm not going to make these adjustments and water down my message. Imagine if Luther had people asking him to water down the document he nailed to the door. I respect that. I don't see that as a fault, and I think you agree. I think that's a really a wonderful attribute that he had.
Yeah.
I interviewed John Rosier last night, and it was great to see the passion he had for Des as well. And he
Yeah.
held up the 1,000-page thesis, or the document that that Des
Yeah.
presented to Glacier View to the
Right.
people before it to read, and he just was holding it up with passion, saying, "This I've never heard righteousness by faith in the gospel described so clearly."
Right.
And you're saying a similar thing, and yeah, I just had this thought last night. What a loss! What a
Yeah.
loss! What a voice snuffed out within the church.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Peter, I would like to give you some links to some of the things I've written, maybe put you in contact with some other people that you may want to invite, or you may want to
Yeah.
consider what they've done. And I'd like to also say I really appreciate you not only inviting me, but I appreciate this whole series that you're doing. Um, there are a number of us who are not Seventh-day Adventists who are still very interested in what's going on in Seventh-day Adventism.
Mm.
And I think the kinds of questions you're asking are legitimate. And I hope you continue to get some good people who will be candid with you about their assessment. So,
Mm.
it's been enjoyable talking about some of these things that I haven't thought as much about over the last few years.
I hope I haven't spoken too much. As an interviewer,
No,
you're
no, not
supposed to
at
sit
all.
back and listen. Can
No,
before you go, can I ask you just two quick questions?
of course.
Can you tell us just a little bit about what you're doing now, where you are actually living? I didn't start with all of that, but just what are you involved with now? With what's your passion in ministry right now?
Yeah.
And then just to finish after that, can you just share a little bit of some closing thoughts on some positive memories that you take away from your experience with Walter Martin, having known
Yeah.
him?
Yeah, thank you very much. What a privilege to do that. Well, I worked at the Christian Research Institute with Walter Martin, and then when Walter died, Walter had a heart attack. He was only 60 years old, and I remember at the time I was right around 30, and I thought Walter was an old man. Now I'm 61, and I think Walter was very young when he died. I then went on to teach philosophy, and I continued a career in apologetics. I work for a apologetic organization called Reasons to Believe. It is primarily kind of science faith issues, but I'm on the scholar team. I'm the non-scientist, so my background is in theology and philosophy. I've written a number of books. Most of them focusing on apologetic type issues. But at the end of my time at the Christian Research Institute, a few colleagues and I wrote a book, Prophets of the Apocalypse, where we looked at not just David Koresh, but I have a chapter in there on Adventism, kind of the backdrop of Koresh. But I have a number of apologetic books. Just finished a new one looking at kind of challenges to Christianity. And in terms of, and you can go on reasons.org and you'll get on the website, type my name in. There's hundreds of articles that I've written on a variety of topics, books available. Walter Martin, some of the things that I really appreciate about Walter is, again, I really appreciate that in the 50s there was this consensus that Adventism was a cult, but Walter wasn't afraid to go against the consensus. And I don't know any evangelical magazines today who would take a risk like Eternity Magazine took a risk. I think Walter had good instincts. Sometimes people they kind of thought he was a heresy hunter. He was, he was going to tell everybody whether their doctrine was sound or not. Well, sometimes when you're involved in that kind of ministry, you can be perceived as being kind of tough. But I think Walter, he had a good balance. He wanted to defend historic Christian truth, but he wanted to include everybody who named the name of Christ. He didn't want to exclude a group that really was Christian. I admired that about Walter, and after Walter died, I thought, well, maybe I'll be the next Walter Martin. And I quickly discovered I didn't have his skill set or his personality. I'm a very different person, but he was a courageous man, and he was also an individual that had a deep love for the Bible. And so I miss him a lot. I have to say, when I was in the presence of Des Ford and Walter Martin, they were so friendly, and they were so gracious to each other. And the friendship that I had with both of them was really two of the finest friendships I've had in my professional life. And so I'm one of Walter Martin's boys, I guess you would say.
Look, Ken, it has just been fabulous chatting with you today, and I know lots of people will be continuing on the conversation in the comments, and
Very good.
and we'll seek you out, your website that you've mentioned, and I'm very much looking forward to getting the links that you've talked about, because I think adding those resources to this series is just going to be more information that people can ponder and look at.
Very good.
So thank you so much, and we'll look forward to keeping in touch.
Yeah.
And,
thank you, Peter. Pleasure.
thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So that was the incredible Dr. Kenneth Samples, and really enjoyed watching that back. What an incredible, articulate human being he is, and what a story he has to tell. I particularly loved his praise of Dr. Desmond Ford, and uploading these videos has just been refreshing and reminding me of what an important series season 2 was. Currently, it has only been available on Facebook in the group, which is a private group. And yes, 6 of them have made their way into YouTube and other platforms. But starting tomorrow, with my interview with Gordon Hammond, which is season 2, number 7, I am entering new waters. From here on in, none of these Facebook interviews season 2 have made it to the general public. They've been hugely successful and popular within Facebook in the private group, watched thousands of times, and I'm super looking forward to getting them up there on YouTube. As I mentioned earlier, Facebook is deleting all live videos within Facebook groups. which to me is seems like a terrible loss, because not only will we lose the videos that were there, but the comments and the many incredible insights that people have brought to the table in the comments. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that I will be able to get all 86 of season 2 onto the public platform. My only concern is that if I come across one or two that aren't there anymore, and I've somehow not saved them on my 12 terabyte hard drive, that they'll be lost. But anyway, I'm on a mission, and I thank everyone for their support. We're going to have a little chat in a minute. Gillian Ford is going to join me just for a quick commentary and look at some of her thoughts of that interview that she just watched as well. And I'd like you all to stick around and share some of your thoughts. I'll be bringing some of them up onto the screen. And today's program was sponsored by a person who wants to remain anonymous, but I do want to highlight that I'm super thankful that they have sponsored today's program. And even though they wish to remain anonymous, I just want to give them credit, because they know who they are, and they're watching, and I just really want to thank them so much for their support. If it wasn't for people's financial support, I would not be able to do what I do. So thank you, everyone that does send some funds my way so I can keep presenting and putting out this material, particularly this season. So if you'd like to contribute and be a sponsor of one of the shows of season 2, just send me a message and we'll make it happen. It's a great way for you to promote a book or a website, or just put your picture on there and say, hey, I sponsored this show. Let me know. They're filling up fast, they're going fast, and there's some really great interviews to come. So thank you, everybody. Stick around. I'm going to be back with Gillian Ford in just a couple of minutes. We're going to have a 5-minute break. So stick around for our post-interview breakdown and analysis, and I know you'll enjoy it. But yeah, for those who are watching, join me again in a few minutes. But this ends this part of the program, and we'll see you soon.
You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, then all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same,
And we're back. Great to have Gillian here with me. Wasn't that a fantastic conversation interview there? I really valued that interview with Ken Samples, and it's really interesting. That one I hadn't watched. The John Rosier one last night I hadn't watched.
Still circling around.
Voice-wise, can everyone in the comments hear my talking all right?
It's the same thing going over. And
Can you hear me talking? I'll just get everyone who's watching just to let me know if they can hear my voice okay.
meaning repeating.
My voice is repeating to you. So just those watching, can you hear my audio okay, not on loop? If that's all right, we'll just wait a minute. And I may need to send you the link, Gillian, via email. Yeah, no, everyone can hear us okay.
Now that's what.
Everyone can hear us okay, Gillian. Can you?
Yeah, it seems.
Have you got the YouTube video going in the background? Have you got another wind?
Not that I know. Oh, hang on. Yes, you're right.
That might be what it is. Good.
Live stream. That fixed it. Thank you.
There we go. Good.
It was off screen.
Yes,
But you're exactly right.
That has
it's
happened to
going
me.
round and round and round.
And just a quick thing. We just got some really great comments about the Ken Samples great interview. And Angela Lima says great interview. Thanks, No Sunday Law coming. And Motor Sapien says it's great to get Ken on again. I've seen his stuff on the Reason site. Can't put the name in or it shadows the comment. But yes, the reasons.org, easy to find. And Motor Sapien in a moment, Gillian is going to answer your question of last night as well. I asked Ken to be on the program today, but his schedule is pretty full on and he wasn't able to make it. And yes, so here we are. And Gillian, what did you think of that interview? Give us some of your thoughts.
I thought it was great. He spoke very nicely about Des. I always like that, obviously. Just like John last night, his talk 5 years ago was spot on.
Wasn't it as relevant today as it was 5 years ago? Like I could seriously have taken us out of the picture and just played it, and I think people would have thought it was going live then.
Yeah,
incredible.
John is a very brilliant man.
Oh, incredible.
He's one of the few true Adventist, Reformation Adventists, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's very good.
Yeah, like an absolute.
Considering he wasn't there, he's like Milton.
Yeah.
I republished Milton's biography and I was amazed at the accuracy of it.
Yeah.
And he didn't even interview me for that book, you know.
Totally grasped it.
But he got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was incredible. As I mentioned last night, you know, with Facebook removing all the live videos, I have a little bit of urgency to get these out. And tomorrow we're going to be watching the Gordon Hammond interview I did, season 2, number 7. And we are now entering the waters where none of the material from now on, virtually none of it, I think there's one, has been put up on the public platform. So we're entering new waters. And as I said, I hadn't seen that Kenneth interview since I interviewed him. I didn't watch it afterwards, even back then. So it was so amazing just to watch it, and as if I was just sitting back and taking it all in for the first time. But he does speak very highly of Des. And do you know what? Most scholars that I speak to that aren't from the Adventist scholarship, that have skin in the game, just people that have really valued the work that Des put out, they all speak super highly of him. So it's really annoying when some of the apologists just try and just do little digs here and there, and really, really annoys me when you have someone of the caliber of Dr. Ken Samples saying that. Didn't he just say towards the end that Des and Walter Martin were the top two people?
Yeah, he was impressed by Des.
Yeah.
And see, Des wasn't difficult, but anyway, I've got a little bit about that later. But Motor Sapiens, okay, Jack Provencher, you asked last night, and I don't seem to have a way to comment on the right side. I can only comment to Peter.
Right.
So Jack Provencher was the only scholar at Glacier View, or person, to state his agreement with Des about the investigative judgment. And Fred Veltman and Jim Cox told Neil Wilson privately, but Jack didn't agree with Des on justification by faith. That was what he said. I agree with Des on the investigative judgment is not biblical, but I don't agree with him on justification by faith. And actually, that's one reason why the more liberal scholars didn't support Des, because of his views on justification by faith. But by and large, they did agree with him on the investigative judgment. And some of them did try. Jim Cox, when I spoke to, I've mentioned that. And Fred Veltman. Fred Veltman said, I think like Des does. And he said, well, just don't talk about it. Just pretty amazing. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Do you remember exactly? I just had a quick look there. I can't find it. Motor Sapien, if you're still watching, can you put the question up again? Do you remember what he actually said?
He just asked me what Jack Provencher said.
Right.
And that's the only time I heard him actually speak on it. He said it in the Thursday afternoon. Because what had happened, now who tells about this? I've got so many documents in my head. But Richard Coffin. He wrote an article either in Adventist Today or Spectrum in 2016, which I have, I think, in volume 9. I came across it. It's a very good article on Glacier View. They used to have meetings with the scholars in the afternoon at Glacier View, and Jack Provencher said to everybody, I've got some good news. He had talked to Neil Wilson and Keith Parmenter about he was going to act as the mediator between them and Des, and to try and negotiate something, basically to say to them, I agree with Des about the investigative judgment. What are you going to do about me? This is a very brave thing to do. But what happened was that Keith Parmenter gave a different answer, according to Jack, to what he said before, and said, if you can't agree to the Dallas statement, the 27 fundamentals, I shouldn't have to ask for your credentials. You should hand them to me. Which shows the tie between the 10-point statement and the Dallas statement. Mm. And he mentioned that again in the Friday afternoon meeting. So that was the circumstances. Jack Provencher did this. He hoped that he could bring the two together, but because of Keith Parmenter, it didn't happen. Nevertheless, It was a very brave act.
Yes, and he managed to keep his job after.
Well, at Loma Linda, there was a protection. That's why they hired Smuts in the 1980s. They protected him. There's I don't think GC can easily attack Loma Linda because of the amount of money that they provide to the church. So there's a certain amount of independence. That's my understanding. On a lot of things I could be wrong.
Recently with Rain de
And he was a physician, see, so what could they do? And he wasn't going around speaking to everybody. That was...
Right.
Smuts got into trouble because he was preaching on the gospel, and Des because he was going around preaching. That was the big issue. All right if you don't talk about it.
Yeah, as long as you don't rock the boat.
And you'll remember with Bill Johnson that these thoughts will come. You asked me to do bullets. Well, I was listening and writing bullets, so they're just sort of extras. But with Bill Johnson, you remember that just before he died, he did an interview with Trevor Lloyd where he basically came clean and he reversed his position, admitted that he knew from the beginning about the 10-point statement. He didn't say that before.
No.
See? And he said that he had talked to Neil Wilson. Neil Wilson asked him how he felt about the investigative judgment issues, and he said that if my memory is right, and you've got to check me on this, but I've got all these articles in the book. He said that he agreed with Des. I don't know whether he quite put it like that, but that's what it meant. And Wilson said, well, what are you going to do about it? And Bill Johnson said, I'm willing to keep it to my chest. And that's what he did.
Yeah,
that's what he did.
Yeah. Motor Sapien has just written Provencher and Maxwell both had attempted censoring against them, I think he's saying, but they both out-theologianed the charges. And a lot of them were quite good at that.
Well, they did have the protection, and again, Provencher was a physician. He was an ethicist. What could they do? They couldn't touch him. He wasn't in their employ, really.
Yeah.
Under their control. So, anyway. So when Ken was talking about when they differed on things, he mentioned later the Sabbath. Sabbath was one issue. The other one was the state of the dead. Des never convinced Walter about the state of the dead. So they would be the sort of issues, other Adventist issues. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
And I mentioned in the comments earlier that I was actually down there for that last meeting, which he said was in June 1989. And we did a GNU issue and I took photos. And Walter actually died a week later. He was in the bathroom and he
took the last
collapsed.
photos.
I took the last photo. And he and I got on like a house on fire.
Yeah.
Very charming man. Very nice.
He seemed to have an amazing charisma about him.
You know, he could be very straight. But
yeah, I love that.
If he liked you, he's very, very nice.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
So I was there at that meeting where Des presented to his Sunday school class. And we also went to his office and he did a recording. I've got a picture of Walter with the earphones on, sitting on a chair, interviewing Des. So I was in there when he did that.
Right.
Yeah, I like Walter Martin. He was a good guy. Now,
No Sunday Law said he was there too. Wow, that's interesting. And No Sunday Law, you made a comment earlier. Can you write it again about what Walter had said about Ellen White turning in her grave? But then there was another funny side mark he made because he didn't agree with the views on the state of the dead. If you could do that. So what's No Sunday Law meaning there? He was there too at where?
Well, he must have been in the class. It's possible that it was announced in GNU and people turned up. I don't know. But okay, I was going to talk about, was Walter fooled? And I don't think he was fooled, because the situation back then, you know, when I was in the church, a lot of ministers knew the gospel. In Australia, there were people, I'm thinking Ron Vince. He was a wonderful gospel minister, knew the gospel. Graham Miller, Hugh Bolst, they're just a few. Graham Bradford, John Carter. And in America, Larry Christoffel, who he mentioned. Larry Christoffel was the minister at the Campus Hill Church. And he invited Des over with Adventist Today in 2000. I think it was 2008. And Des took those meetings about the views at Loma Linda, N.T. Wright, and the Jesus Seminar and the Moral Influence Theory. And I have transcribed. There were 4 meetings, only 3 got recorded because they ran out of tape. And I have transcribed 3 of them. I can't remember which volume, but I do have an index to all my volumes because even I don't know where everything is. And if you write to me on Messenger, I'm happy to send it to you. It's 52, it's 52 pages.
No Sunday Law said it was the Riverside meeting with Ford and Walter.
Yeah, that was it. It was in Riverside. So anyway, there were plenty of people preaching the gospel. And a lot of people who came in from outside knew the gospel. And Des said when he became an Adventist, now he would have been in his teens, so in the 1940s. Mrs. McDowell's father knew the gospel. David Sibley knew the gospel, and he mentioned others. And of course, Des's wide reading of everybody, especially Spurgeon. And the wonderful thing about Spurgeon is he centers you on the cross. So he's worth reading every day. A particular book that Carol Platt's been reading lately is Christ's Glorious Achievements by Spurgeon. It's a wonderful book on the cross, so I recommend that. So I don't think that the people meeting with Walter were deceiving him, because what you have to understand, the scholars in the church talk to each other, not necessarily to the lay people. And our experience after Glacier View, and we came back here in about 2000, so about 20 years later, and Des was travelling in Australia and even went to Avondale. He came back and he said, I can't believe it, because he said the things that I talked about at Glacier View, they take for granted. They take for granted. So among the scholars talking to each other, a lot of them don't believe in the investigative judgment. They didn't at Glacier View. That's what, but it's not something that they would divide the churches over, so they didn't talk about it. So that's my experience. Yeah. So I think when Walter came in, this group of people, this is where they were at. And Heppenstall to us was confused on righteousness by faith, because he always included sanctification. And once you do that, you make righteousness by faith, justification and sanctification. You put the believer's experience in with it. And so that can lead to perfectionism. Now, Heppenstall wasn't a perfectionist, but he was certainly preaching a more Calvary-centered focus, and he was hugely influential on many teachers. And he was around at this time when these other men were getting together with Walter Martin. So I don't think it's true that they were pretending at all. I think this is what was being taught.
I don't think, and you might be 100% right. My own personal take is that I don't think they were purposely being disingenuous or dishonest, but I think they knew that there was going to be a big backlash if certain people got hold of their perspective. Like M.L. Andreessen was one of the most notable academics and theologians of the day. He wasn't even asked to be on the committee. I think they were hopeful that the church was heading in this direction, and they desperately didn't want a book to come out saying that they were a cult. So they wanted to head that off at the pass. And so I think their intentions were good, because they thought, this is where we're headed. We don't want this we don't want to be called to the rest of the Christian body a cult. That will totally stop this beautiful positive growth from occurring. So I think they omitted certain things to Walter Martin, which he himself demonstrably felt. When you watch the interviews with him on the Ankerberg show, he's feeling a bit gypped, and he's feeling he's really putting Bill Johnson's toes to the fire, because he's going, hang on a second. But I agree with you. I don't think they were being liars or deceptive, but I think they were.
Well, you've got to remember that at
political.
the time, M.L. Andreessen, however big a position he had, that his views were accepted by a lot of the scholars. So they thought, now this extreme division, I think, really came later. I think that was the beginning of it. And they thought that they had progressed and got past this stuff.
That's right.
And I think the very few
I think they were
people-
naive and miscalculated the situation.
Well, I don't know if they were naive. I think that's what they genuinely thought. But anyway, we can differ on that. But it was following M.L. Andreessen that, you know, all the stuff that happened in Australia with Burnside and Kent and the other people who followed them, who were rabidly after Des for decades.
Yeah.
And pressured Parmenter. It's either him or you.
I think these traditional Adventists, the original Adventists, the ones that had their nose really out of joint by questions on doctrine and by Frieda presenting Adventism to the world in a way they didn't agree with, I think they were concerned that the pillars of their faith were under threat. And the reality is, if you look at official Adventism, you can't take the investigative judgment out of it. And that's why they were so scared of Des, because Des was saying the investigative judgment is not biblical. And
well, I think what Des would say about that was that Ellen White, in the early pages of Great Controversy, put the views of the brethren. And in her situation, it's bad enough being a woman now. But back then, as John said yesterday, they were very hard on her. She really had to, you know, she had her husband and the pioneers pressuring her. This is why she went to Australia and so on. But she was more progressive. And I told you about Des and his thesis, which won't mean much to most of you, but he got that from Ellen White's ideas later in Great Controversy, where she comes out with her own views, and as far as he was concerned, they were unique. He never found her sources, where they were from. And of course, he went and read everything that'd been written in the world on it. So there was a difference, but of course, when she died, the church, as John said yesterday, went with Uriah Smith.
yes.
Now, a lot of us came into the church. You know, I'm sympathetic with these people who didn't know. And I've told the story before. In the 19s, you know, I used to write these things, and I'm not trying to put myself, but it's just an example. When I wrote that book on the nature of Christ in 1975, I'd come into the church. The minister who brought me in was progressive and never believed in investigative judgment. He said this as an old man at the Charlie home in front of all the old people who shot them. Eric Robinson.
Really?
Yeah. There was a Kent in the audience, and they nearly had a heart attack. Because I think I told you in 2000, somebody at Spectrum did a spoof that Jan, and there's no record of it now, but it was a big thing at the time, that Jan Paulson had called all, you know, Washington Post and all these big papers to the GC and announced that we were no longer going to believe in investigative judgment. And I told you, when Vern Heiss found out that it wasn't true, he wept.
Yeah.
And Eric Robinson was in the old folks' home at Currumbong, and he stood up and gave a talk, and he said, I never believed in it. And I can tell you that he didn't, because he did Bible studies with me, and he was very light on prophecy, and he was very light on Ellen White. She was a good Christian woman, etc. So I'm somebody who comes in the church under the new regime.
Yes.
And I'm going along. I married Des, and we've been, now 1975, we've been married for 5 years, been to England, come back. And all of a sudden, Des and I were co-teaching at the village church, and the young marrieds. So he would teach 1 week when he was there, and I'd teach 1 week. And we got Herb Douglas's pamphlet called Faith in Action, not the one Jesus the Model Man, which was 1977, but an earlier one. But it's very clear where he stood. And then this book by Herb Douglas, Maxwell from Loma Linda, Graham Maxwell, Larendel, and was it Heptonstall? I think it was. So 2 views on perfectionism, and it was edited by Herb Douglas, and it was called Perfection, the Impossible Possibility. Well, I read that and I nearly fell over. It was a huge shock to me because I'd never heard of traditional Adventism.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a heresy because I'd only known the other. I'd been taught the sinless nature of Christ, came to college, carried on learning. There'd been many people in the church like this, had no awareness of traditional Adventism. So I stayed up for 3 nights and I wrote this little tract, which Paxton said started the war. I don't think it did. Des said it didn't, but
I think Parment,
it was just coincidental.
Yeah.
So, but that's typical of somebody. And I think even with scholars, there will be people who were out of this traditional view and not. It was passé. They thought it was gone with. It was something that we taught, and now we'd become more biblical. So I think, and probably also they were very hopeful because they were all good men.
Yeah, and these are all things that you and I 100% agree on. I think my only divergent take on it is that, you know, you're using words like new regime, that you were shocked with the traditional view. There's a certain, because of questions on doctrine, nature of Christ being changed, you guys came into the church where there was this hope. You just mentioned the word hope, that the church was heading towards a more progressive biblical stance, because it was. But I think what the progressive movement failed to realize is that Adventism at its core DNA, the nature of Adventism, whether Ellen White progressed or changed her views or not, is still very legalistic in orientation.
Oh, I agree with that.
Part of it are certain pillars that the traditional Adventist is willing to fight for, monetize, destroy reputations. And there are, as I've always said, yeah, sure, there's plenty of different nuanced types of Adventists.
Yeah, I agree with well, I agree with you to a certain point, but I guess where we differ is that I think that they don't have ownership of what Adventism really is. But in practice,
and I've always been on the edge of that one. If you watch interviews with me, sometimes I'm agreeing with you on that, sometimes I'm not. And I think in many ways I'm still on the edge of that. I feel like,
of course, in my current position, I'm not a member because they kicked us out, even though we gave our membership in, but they went after it for many, many years. And if I go to church now, I did go for a period for about a year and a half with Des, and I thought to myself, I don't think like them anymore.
No,
even though it was a very good gospel church and a good minister, this other stuff still hangs around.
That's right.
But obviously, I'm clearly, I do think there is an ideal Adventism, and then there's the reality.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think really, if we were slicing the cheese more finely, I agree with you that there is this ideal Adventism, and it shone for a long time. My take that the reality that gem is not going to take over, not going to shine, not going to gain massive traction.
Well, we agree on that.
Dampens my hope, but there's a lot of progressors who it doesn't dampen their hope, and that's all right. I don't want to be the guy dampening people's hope, but I think it's important to realize that at least acknowledge, not just people watching, Adventists interested in this kind of stuff, that there are two main groups.
I think there's more than two groups.
To me, they are subgroups. There are subgroups of progressives, like that great interview I did with Bob, and Bob was talking about revisionists and traditionals, and he had several groups. There's other people that say there's 7 groups. Yeah, I'm just saying, within the group that you found yourself being shocked when you were teaching these things, and all of a sudden you're going, wow, this is heresy. And then you found out, no, that's just traditional Adventism. Generally speaking, there are traditional, we believe in the pillars, and there's other groups that can be subdivided, but generally speaking, there's a more progressive group. I'm not talking about standards. I'm not talking about people this or that, having different views on how they should live their Christian life. But theologically, there is those who are slanted to the Des Ford theology, and there's those who are slanted towards the traditional theology.
Yes, and there's some who are going in the third direction, but anyway, more of that later. I'm working on it.
There are splinter groups.
But there's also, you can understand after Glacier View with people like, take for instance John Carter and Graham Bradford. Took them 15 years. They told us that themselves for them to come round, because they liked what Des taught in class and were quite opposed to him at the beginning. And it took them 15 years to work it out. Then they became, at least in private conversations,
that was what I was going to say.
More radical than us.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. In
So
private,
they had hope that things would change. And for a while, the Australasian division did stand up on things like the Sabbath school class. This is after Glacier View.
Yeah.
There was a gospel focus in Australia, but I think that it's become much more fundamentalist in my opinion.
100%. And it's not going to change because these guys have an awakening, but they won't publicly say it. And I think it's important to call that out.
But I do think that, I don't feel that we always had a policy, like we fellowship with the Standish brothers. They said terrible things about Des, made up and really suable.
Nasty.
But we were always friendly to them. So you didn't have to think like us.
Progressive Adventists pride themselves at being able to, get on with everybody. And to me, all of that's great. But at the end of the day,
well, I think we need to let people
collectively, like John said last night, there needs to be some kind of leadership. And I just think the progressives have just let the team down.
Look, it's the very nature that if you've got a more liberal mind, these things don't matter so much. Whereas if you're much more fundamentalist, they mean everything, and so you put everything at it. So I think
you've nailed it.
It's been tried. It's all been tried, and it sort of hasn't worked. And really, the experts say that when you have a church and it breaks into groups, usually it's only one generation, and then it's that group is gone. And I think we've got to sort of accept that.
Yeah. We agree on that for sure. We agree on a lot of things, Gillian.
We do. We agree on most of it. But I think I'm more willing to say that's what you believe, and I wouldn't criticize people or try and
I'm more
really.
critical. I'm not gaslighting them, but I'm more critical of the progressives because they were and continue to be weak in the support of what they believe publicly, and I feel let down by them. And if I just felt that they let me down then, I would have gotten over that years ago. But what I'm finding is they continue to do that on a weekly basis.
Yeah, but it's clear. It's like the current Trump government. If you disagree, you're out.
Exactly.
No job.
Yeah, I find that I'm just saying I see that as weak. I don't see that as a choice to be a little bit more, hey, let's all be living in the big tent. Let's all have diverse views. I don't want to create any waves because I love Jesus. I go, yeah, cool.
Yeah, but that's you.
But it's also weak. It's weak.
That's you, but it's not how everybody feels. They want a minister. And I'm quite sympathetic with that.
I'm not talking about the grassroots people that are enjoying Adventism as they see it. I'm talking about the people that say to you, oh, this was terrible and blah, 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 and I don't believe in investigative judgment. But to everyone else, they go, hey, I'm putting my brand to this and let's preach about the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I'm talking about that kind of person. That I find that duplicit. and I'm annoyed about them.
Well, one thing that I've got written down here is that, and Vern Parmenter made this clear in a letter he wrote in 2005 when he was rapping Milton and Arthur on the knuckles because they made a presentation and blamed his father. So he wrote on GC paper, and he got Neil Wilson to write, and his mother, and Ron Taylor, to basically counter all this stuff and to say that the rumours about John Brinsmead weren't true. But in that letter, Vern says that after Glacier View, they started screening teachers not complying now. Back in 1980, it's been going on ever since, which means you can only teach if you're willing to preach the party line.
That's right. It's this party line kind of. I look at someone like John Rosier last night. I don't for a second view him as weak, and he's still an Adventist. I absolutely respect the man. One of the highest respects I could ever give is
Now, who's this?
John Rosier. I
he's
totally
wonderful.
respect him, and he's still an Adventist. So I'm not just saying, if you stay an Adventist, you're weak. I'm not saying that.
He's a very different sort of
I'm
man.
saying that if you have a total different belief, for example, on the sanctuary doctrine, on the Holy Spirit being the seal and not the Sabbath, or that you don't believe in the Sunday is the mark of the beast, I'm saying if you truly don't believe that, but you're unwilling to share that view because you don't want to disturb the party line, I'm calling those people weak, and I suggest that they keep offering us false hope. And I think I'm certainly not saying the average person, and I'm not calling John Rosier average by any stretch, but the person who speaks their mind and shares their beliefs and says, I choose to still be an Adventist, I respect that. You see the
But
subtle
you've got people like Lloyd Grolleman who really believe,
I respect Lloyd.
He says he believes the gospel that Des taught, but not his views on prophecy. There's a lot of people that take that position.
I think he's confused.
And
but
what the church has done, which is actually,
I respect him.
I don't know where we're getting off piece, as we have a want to do, or whether it's of interest to people. But
I forgot then that we were actually live. Sorry,
that
everyone.
is funny. Now, what was I
we were
just
just
saying?
having a chat.
What was I just talking about?
Well, we're talking about the nuanced difference of my sounding a bit more critical of some of these Adventists, and you being more inclusive, and let live and let live, Pete.
Well, you cannot get into people's consciences. They have to, they've got to live with their decisions. Now, it was something to do with, let me just think. I was talking about people who believe in Des's gospel, which they don't actually, because they're putting sanctification in there somewhere in the standing before God, which I don't think is the right thing. But on the other hand, the church has changed its viewpoint, and the book by Roy Ingram, which I helped him publish it, where he talks about the new view on the sanctuary. That's a very good book, because he interviews Roy Gain and Clifford Goldstein, and
let me add,
the other one.
That is a pseudonym.
Mm.
And so I'm not saying he's weak. I'm not even criticizing individuals, but I'm saying, isn't it sad that you have a beautiful thing that you believe in, and you can't shine it like John Rosier did last night? You can't shine it like you and Des have. I'm feeling like, okay, don't call it weakness. Whatever it is, isn't it sad that you can't share the love of the gospel for fear of losing your job, for fear of being somehow suppressed or marginalized?
It is, but it's how it is, and
it's how it is. But I think
it's not just in Adventism. But anyway,
I think people should be able to say I think people should be able to say that they don't like it. That's all I'm doing. I'm just saying I just don't like that. I don't like when I do it myself.
So anyway, before I forget the point, and I'm good at that, the new view on the investigative judgment has been altered, and I've mentioned this before, but I'll do it again. Niels Erik Andreasen did an interview with you, and he was on the SDAQ&A committee. That was the Daniel and Revelation committee that went for 10 years after Glacier View, basically to answer Des's manuscript.
Yeah.
And Roy Ingram has written the best paper, which you can get online, showing that only 2 or 3% of the SDAQ&A series actually dealt with Des's issues, you know. And so then he wrote this book. So anyway, Niels Erik says that they agreed that the investigative judgment in Great Controversy was harsh and they had to reword it.
Yeah.
Now, I won't get it exactly right, but they basically said they used the term good news. Very clever. The investigative judgment is good news that the last generation are going to vindicate God. So by living a perfect life, we've got the privilege of vindicating God. Now, that's a ridiculous position because God vindicated himself through Christ at the cross. And look, when I look at the state of the church and the way a lot of people behave, there's no hope of them vindicating God. It's blasphemous. But that's what they said. And then they started using, instead of the term investigative judgment, the pre-Advent judgment, and they dropped the date. Now, Des used the term pre-Advent judgment, which happens just before Christ comes. Des basically said, God knows who are his. There's a snap decision at the end.
Yeah.
But it's already been decided at the cross. So they're using that terminology and dropping the date. Now, if it's just before the second coming, it's not 1844. Do you get the point?
Yeah.
So this is the new view that church teaches, and people can go along with that and still believe in what the church is teaching about the investigative judgment. But it's very deceitful.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've said before that Des used to say to me, and he said it shortly before he died, he said, Glacier View never dies. It's always coming up.
Yeah.
And he said, a thing is not settled until it's settled right. And I found out that Rudyard Kipling said that, and it's in a number of Agatha Christie's mysteries, because I wondered where it came from. I thought it sounds like a quote.
Yeah.
He said, the dates are wrong. The 2,300 days is evening and morning, so it's 1,500. He said, all the dates are questionable. You can't prove them. And so the whole thing falls through. And he said, that's what's got to be settled, the dates, 100%. Not the theory. You can come up with a theory, a nice theory. And but that's the fact that the ministers can stay in because they have an official new way of expressing it.
Yeah.
But see, when people get fired over the investigative judgment, they're judged by a Great Controversy, not by the new view. So do you follow all that?
Follow it well and
Was that clear?
agree with you. No, it was very, very clear. And I just think that kind of analysis, as you look in and comment accurately on that, attracts a lot of people who are duped, disingenuous, dishonest, deluded. It just creates a quagmire. And I just feel that Des had a very clear. It's just sad that all of that happened. I'm just sad.
Well,
the defrocking happened because
remember that
the
Des
church lost an opportunity.
Des said to me, well, as he said, what's never settled ultimately will be. And he said, I was born to go to Glacier View. So he took it on. He took it well. Yeah.
And I hope that there is still a light that glimmers, but I know for sure, unless people stop being weak and stand up, they're going to lose it. They're going to lose what they potentially could have gained from all that hard work.
Somebody's just saying Adventists are not Christians. It's not true.
I'll just divert. I just want to before some things pop off the screen, Motor Sapien asked you, do you have any old issues of GNU newsletter? I'm looking for one from around 1981.
Is there nothing on the GNU website? Because there are some on there.
Yeah, I think Motor Sapien, you need to chase there. No Sunday Law wrote the funny comment that was at one of these meetings you were talking about at Riverside. At the last meeting with Ford in June of 1989, Walter Martin commented that Ellen White would be turning over in her grave, and then turned to Desmond Ford and said, unconsciously, of course.
That's a good
And
one.
he added that people were in stitches. So let's have a look at some of these.
You want my next bullet? Oh,
Yes,
well.
give me your next bullet. I'm just going to have a little wander down the comments.
I was talking about the priority of the Wilsons in governing the church, which is a factor. And the person who's written about this, and I've got some of his articles in my books, is Matthew Quarty, who comes from Ghana and is one of the keenest writers, usually on Spectrum, but he's got a series on the Wilsons that's very good. And I've sent him my books because I've sent, I don't worry about people buying them. I've sent them to the key thinkers, and he's one of them. Very good. Anyway, he points out the longevity of the family in power, and I think one huge problem for Adventists are the elite families who run everything. Ted Wilson's grandfather, Nathaniel Carter Wilson, was a division president, he was a division president in at least 3 places: Southeast Asia, India, Australia, and then Indonesia. But he was the vice president of the General Conference from the 1940s on. And he was supposed to be the next GC president. And he got into trouble in Australia and he resigned. And he lost by 4 votes in 1954 in the General Conference. And the reason was that they sent 4 people over from Australia. So he didn't get in, but his son and his grandson got in. But that means, and Nathaniel Carter's father came into Adventism through attending an Ellen White mission. I've got the details of it somewhere. So here's a family who almost have a divine right because they heard Ellen White and so on.
Yeah.
And they've been in power since the 1940s. Later, he really was never punished apart from not becoming GC president. This is Nathaniel Carter. He became the Michigan State president, conference president. He was there when Des was there, so he knew Des. And he's sitting at Dallas. Now, I can't find the evidence for that. It was in the June 1983 Spectrum. I can't find that online. Some of these copies are missing, unfortunately. And if you have those, it would be here I am.
There's your balloons.
Waving balloons at myself. So my memory is that in that issue, it talks about this was the only time that a General Conference president was present with his father. So they're sitting together, making decisions about the Dallas Statement and ultimately Des. That's why I'm interested in the story. But here's the position of these elite families. Now, in Australia, just as a side issue, the Kent family are constantly reported in the press every few years. And at the moment, you've got Bubsy going around Australia and all these bike rides handing out great controversy, which is being done all over the world, multiple billions of dollars worth of copies. The big market plan is to use great controversy because it's got the main, it's got the Sabbath, the mark of the beast, etc., and the investigative judgment in it. And so it's the main business plan.
Yeah.
And so that family, and look, there's lots of wonderful Kents. One of them brought me in and another one pushed me out. And, Gary Kent is not a finer man than Gary Kent.
Yeah.
Got a lot of time for him, but some of them are rogues.
Yeah.
And Jill knows all about it because she finds out. And it's wrong for families like that to have so much power. And that's one of the huge problems in the church.
Yes.
So I just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah.
Pushing
very
for
true.
this fundamentalist view, you know.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Leadership often tries to appease the masses by saying, hey, it's changing, and hang in there, and then behind the scenes they're the ones rooting for all the traditional fundamentalist organizations, and so they speak with a forked tongue.
So
Often.
another point, so that's a point, the elite people. These are just things that came up listening to Ken and the problems. And I mentioned how Vern Parmenter in his letter in 2005, because he was at GC, he knew what went on. They brought in controls at all the schools to make sure that the teachers who came in would comply, that they believed in the old stuff. Some of, Denny Ford Town, for instance, he's pretty straightforward, and there'd be plenty of them, but this is a general rule so that they wouldn't be embarrassed again by somebody like Des, I suppose. And then when it comes to the Sabbath school, you had Erwin Gain, who made life so difficult, not only for us, but for all the faculty at PUC. And in the end, they broke his contract because of his behaviour. And the GC hired him and put him in the Sabbath school. And he prepared the Sabbath school pamphlets, and he was a rank traditionalist, very like the Standish brothers. And of course, you've got what's his name? I've got it written down. I'll find it in a minute. I didn't write it down, but you know who's in charge of the Sabbath school at the moment. Very traditional.
Yeah.
So people are getting
is it
fed
Finlay?
this every. Hey?
Is it Finlay or Clifford?
No.
Not
Let me
Clifford.
think about it. It'll come back. So you've got this control already that's been going on, particularly since Glacier View, over the schools and over the Sabbath school pamphlet, where people are just being brainwashed. And ministers get punished. I hear about it. I know the way people get treated, and some of it's absolutely shocking. So, all right, that's that bit. And then when Ken was saying, one view that was Des would not give an inch. He said to me, I'd done the work. He said, I didn't go to Glacier View to change my mind, but he was perfectly polite. And the scholars are wrong to think that anything but complete capitulation and saying he was wrong would have made any difference. I don't even know then. I think they planned to axe him, and that was it. And I mentioned last night with John, the person who said you must bend to the brethren was Charles Bradford. Now, his father apparently almost went out over the investigative judgment. Des told me he knew about the issues, but that was the issue. You must bend to the brethren. That was the push in that Friday. It was really bullying to comply.
Yeah.
So there really wasn't any chance of a job after Glacier View, because people Wilson had gone to Loma Linda the week before Glacier View, and he told them Des is not on trial. His ideas are on trial. So they relaxed. They came and told the others that Des would be all right, but he wasn't all right. And that wasn't the plan. But you've got to remember that PUC broke the contract with Des before we left PUC. Now, I'd forgotten that. I read it in the Castle interview. And he was given 6 months to write up a paper. And when that happens, there's no job at the end. Now, Dr. Hamill talked about they had to make the decision of whether Des would go back to PUC. But that was never in the work, believe me. And there was a solution on the floor, which came basically from Wally Scragg, who was a friend, but he was very, very careful. And afterwards, he He dropped it like anything. A solution to go to New Gallery, because he told us personally, we went out to eat with him at the time of Dallas, that this wasn't a problem in Europe. And Wally Scragg was highly intelligent. He was at least as smart as Des. Very political. So what happened with that? It was talked about on the floor. In fact, Luke said to me on the Friday, I don't want to go to London. It was talked about as a solution for Des, because they knew it wasn't a problem. So they had 3 meetings to fire Des, one on the Friday afternoon where Prexad met, and then 2 others where they met with him. They didn't invite me because I cried all through the first one. And the third one where they actually took away Des's credentials. Now that was illegal because he worked for the Australasian division. They didn't want to do it. They asked Prexad to do it, but it was illegal. So when that came up about going to the New Gallery, what they had done in that third meeting was they stacked the committee. They brought in Kenneth Wood, Arthur White, remember what, and Herb Douglas, at least those 3. I wasn't there, but that's what Des told me. So they added them to the committee and they said, look, Des is too much of a heretic to go anywhere. So that idea got squashed. So anyway, that's just another thought that I had.
Yeah, that's good. Good to know that.
So the 2 issues over which Des could not agree to were mentioned in Parmenter's letter. And I've mentioned to you that not only was the 10-point statement greatly added to, and we never saw it before it got published. It was only on a small sheet of paper in my memory, and Des said, give it to me. I can read that in 5 minutes. And it was a list of statements with a few texts. And Des said, there's no evidence in this. And Bob Spangler said, by the time we publish it in the ministry, which remember was 2 months later, it will have the evidence. And Des said, I hope I see it. And Bob Spangler promised that he would. But Bob Spangler forgot, because I asked about him in 1983 and I said, you promised. And I said, what actually happened was Des got taken off the mailing list and he was fired September 15 before the ministry came out. So he had to borrow a copy from a friend. See?
Yeah, that proves.
So that was highly altered. I will show that when I do the actual talk. I've got the pages. I've been putting stuff aside. I'll show you. It's almost 3 pages, the 10-point statement, but it wasn't that when it was shown to Des. Des never saw that document. The other thing was the letter. There were 2 things in it that Des could not do, that they said he must do. And these were taken out. I can't remember the others, and we weren't given a copy. But number 1 was about Bob Brinsmead. There was a whole lot of talk about Bob Brinsmead. They never spoke to me about what I was supposed to have done in colluding with Bob. It was never addressed before, during, or afterwards. And I told you the only reason I know about it is somebody on the floor told me early in the week at Glacier View that John Brinsmead had gone down to Parmenter and accused Des of colluding with Bob. Bob had written his 1844 book. Des had done the forum, and afterwards they were going to join together to destroy the church. And they said he can say that he didn't do this because Jill was the mediator.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely fabricated. And I've mentioned that before because it's a sore point, because it wasn't true. But if that hadn't been mentioned on the floor, I would never have known. And because of that, 8 years later, I asked Bob, what was that about? And he knew. And the people who worked for him at Verdict in America, they knew because he told them. But because
he mentions it in one of the interviews I do with him. He talks about that and confirms there was no collaboration in the slightest. There was friendship. There was ships passing in the night. There was occasional conversations and bumping into each other.
Well, at the time, there was
never a
I think the last time Bob dropped by, because he would drop by, and Des was the person in Australia who dealt with heresy. It was expected. And it was a big boon to the church when Froome and Sibley were in. But after that, Parmenter, I mean, the talk was all about us being connected with Bob, and it just wasn't true, but it had a huge impact, but not mentioned in the ministry except an allusion to the enemies of the church. And the week before Des was fired, he wrote to them and said, neither my wife or I have colluded with enemies of the church. And that's what he meant, but it made no difference because it was a tool. So anyway, one point was that Des had to go in the Review and Herald and distance himself from Bob. And at the time, Bob was preaching the Reformation gospel. Not only that, but he had a huge influence, for instance, on the Presbyterian Church. And I've met a minister who was actually a barrister, and because of verdict at that time, he went to Yale and studied. He's a teacher over here, Barry Green. That was because of Bob Brinsmead, and there was a huge gospel thing that went through young Presbyterian ministers. And Des said to them, I'm not going to damn Bob because he's preaching the gospel. I don't like his methods and everything that he does. But he said he's doing what we should be doing. So that was one point. And Des said, you could give me years and I could not go along with that. And the other one was that Parmenter said to him, it's not enough to put your ideas in your pocket. You've got to say I was wrong and change your mind and preach the Dallas Statement, which links the Dallas Statement with the 10-point statement again, if you remember what I was saying.
Yeah.
And Des said, are you asking me to lie? And he said, no, but if you can't do it, I shouldn't have to ask you for your credentials, which is what he said on Thursday. You should hand them in. Now, they're the 2 points. And Des said, you could give me years, and I could never do that. Yeah. And they couldn't understand. In fact, Neil Wilson said to Des, I would do everything I could to distance myself from Bob Brinsmead in your position. But see, Des couldn't do it. Yeah. Des couldn't do it.
That's that kind of conscience I was talking about last night.
You know, and Bob and John did some tricky things, but Bob said to me, Des treated me so beautifully.
Yeah. Yeah.
He wouldn't betray him. And that's what it was about. That's what it was really about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me see if I've got anything else.
Yes, we'd better wrap it up. Motor Sapien has said, I'm home now. What was the name? Gillian, can you name that Perfection book again?
It was edited by Herbert Douglas, and it was called Perfection, The Impossible Possibility. And there's just one thing that I wrote down at the end. Chuck Scriven in a recent Spectrum wrote a paper on how all the scholars, apart from Andrews, are being excluded from all the new books. And so he mentions Fritz Guy and Richard Rice and their great contribution, totally ignored. And this is another way of control. So, but I thought to myself, well, you guys all did that to Desert Glacier View.
Yeah.
Now you don't like it.
Yeah, I think
which is a mean thought on my part, but
I think they acted weak.
True.
I think they were weak.
And just one last thing.
Yeah.
These are important things. When you read Larry Geraghty's article, it's clear at Dallas, which is April 1980, that the only scholar that was invited on that committee to go over the 27 fundamentals, which got changed and changed and changed again, and in the last day, there's Russell Standish and other people who were very right wing who were changing it right at the last minute. So Larry Geraghty was the only one on the committee from Loma Linda. So that should have told the scholars that they were being excluded from the decision about Des. So I don't know I think those are all.
Yeah, that's great. I'm so glad that you were able to join me. Having your contribution of, once we've seen the episode, if people just want to watch the particular episode I played, great. But to have a discussion afterwards is just gold, because there's just a few things you've said today that, help to clarify, help people in the future who are watching this. They can go, oh, I didn't know that. I'm going to go and chase that up. I'll go and read that article or whatever. So I really appreciate it, Gillian. Thank you.
Well, this is what comes from years of going over and over the documents and getting something new. Like that one I read to you last night from James Londers. That is such an important document. The information is nowhere else. The reaction of Jack Provencher and Fritz Guy initially when they found out the desert had been fired. Now, they got talked out of it and managed it later, but that's how they reacted at the time. Larry, because Jim Londis was on that committee, the temple, he didn't know it was going to be used. They were told it's going to be used for showing the administrators where Des differed from the traditional view. But in Wilson's mind, he was going to use it to fire Des, and that's what he did on Friday. Not the consensus statement, but the 10-point statement.
Yeah.
And Jim Londis was on that committee. So when he comes back from going around town on Friday, not knowing what's happened with Des, he doesn't even know what the meeting was that Fritz Guy was talking about. Fritz shouted at him. Fritz was angry at him, and he's a very calm man. He blamed him for it, and he knew nothing about it. But you see, when the documents come and you piece them together, you can't get away from the facts. You just can't get away from it.
Yeah. A lot of people during this part of the conversation have been saying, can we sponsor an episode? So yes, I'm, as you know, not organized, so I have to follow little routines, and I just simply, on my list there, if you go and look at the top of SDAQ&A in the featured section or the pinned section, you can see the list there. And when someone's put their hand up, for example, Rick Dingman just wants to sponsor, I think, one of the most amazing episodes, the 11-minute gospel. Remember, you and I were there. Des, I said to Des at the end of one of the interviews, can you, and I'm so grateful for this, I said, can you, share us your passion, the love of the gospel? What's the gospel to you? I can't remember exactly what I said.
And you were recording him, and I got my iPad out.
And that's what I was just going to say. I was so grateful that you had your iPad, because we have that on the visual of it. And it's just such a beautiful moment. I think it's 11 minutes. So Rick has just put his hand up to sponsor that show. Angela Lima is sponsoring the George Knight episode. There's some really brilliant episodes there that, folk, if you want to support what I'm doing, sponsor an episode, and I will, if you have a book or a link or something you'd like to really promote, that will pop up throughout the interview, promoting it for years to come. So there's some good ones. I'm just looking at what's coming up. We were just talking about Lloyd Grolleman. He's on next week. Gordon Hammond probably tomorrow. And look, I invite the people I interviewed to come on. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. So I'll just go ahead anyway. I'm not going to plan too far ahead. I can't. My brain is last week, this week, and next week. So if you've ever contacted me and I haven't gotten back to you, that's because it may have been further ago than last week. So chase me if you need me for something. But yeah, so far, Bill Johnson, John Godfrey, Norm Young, Ross Cole, John Rosier, Kenneth Samples. It's just been fantastic to sort of put our heads back into this series that was 5 years ago. Can you believe that, Gillian? 5 years. So
it's amazing, and they're great, because I know a lot more than I did 5 years ago, and they're on the money.
Look, fresh.
And for people who weren't there, it's just amazing.
Yeah. And there's so many new members now to SDAQ&A that didn't even really know about this. So it's a whole new audience. I hope everyone's enjoying it. As I said, tomorrow, Gordon Hammond. Next day, we have Tyler Morgan doing a Good News Fellowship presentation. And then next week, I'll be playing back Lloyd Grolleman, and a very interesting one I did with Wendy and Peter Marks. Remember Raglan's son, Peter? And Ruth Ellen Marks was on it. After that, there's Lyle Heiss, Harry Ballas, David Thiel, Irish Yob, Graham Fraunfelder, Bob Wolfgram, John Den, and
don't forget Lyndon Rogers. Did you mention
where is the Lyndon one? I'm just trying to see.
You need to put him on so he doesn't get lost, because
it's number 23. Number 23, right after Niels Erik Andresen. Milton Hook's on a couple of times, Lowell Tarling. Bob Brinsmead's number 24. It's exciting. I'm going to have to do 1 or 2 a week because, as I said, Facebook's like coming up behind me. Delete. I've got to keep ahead of the game.
Are we on in 2 weeks?
So yes, I very much want to get you back in 2 weeks, but we'll just confirm the date because I've just got to check. I've got to go to Melbourne, but yes, I want you to do a standalone what led to Glacier View. I think it's really important because I'm often saying to people, they say, "What's this? What happened? How explain that?" I'd rather give them one link to a 1-hour episode where you just say, "Here's what happened. I'm taking you from 1956 to 1980 or whatever you choose." And it'll just be a bang, bang, bang introduction to Glacier View. So that way anyone that asks me about this, I can send them that link. I better go, Gillian. And such a good conversation. And Kenneth Samples, wow, incredible guy. People can go and find his work at reason.org. Nice and easy. Thanks all for watching, and we'll look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. And I don't know if you got time, you might be able to pop in and have a look what's going on tomorrow with Gordon.
I don't think I'll be. No, I won't be around tomorrow. I've got to go and have my eyes tested after having my cataracts done.
What
You
time
realise it's nearly 12 hours since we were here together last night. 3 o'clock in the morning.
Trust me, I did the program, saved the file, went to bed at 5:30 a.m., woke up, had a shower, came out, did the show. Like, it feels like I've just totally immersed myself in the show today. Thank you. See you, Gillian. See you, everybody. See you tomorrow.